So let's continue with these two packages and the functions that were included in the theoretical part. Now let's see how to apply them in practice with a little bit more detail. So in order to do these exercises, we're going to use another data set, and these come from observations through time. This would be 1 year period. This is from Mexico. And here I would be combining the functions that read the data and also the table function in order to have this format that we saw before that's a little bit more practical. You can see that the data here is also in the global environment. And the first point that we're going to see is that these functions are from the TIDAR package. And this shows us how to change the format of the data so that it can be in this format. So these are the data that have the variables in the columns already defined, the different observations in the rows with each value in its cell. So this data has the variable as area and yield. These are the variables because these are different values. The unit that you have for each one of them is different, so it makes no sense to different type of analysis. So it makes no sense to keep this format. So we are going to change this format, this long format that has 200 plus rows, but we're going to change it into a format that's wide so that each one of the variables are included in one column. So in the arguments over here, the first argument would be the data set. So these are the data that I read before that are in the long data set format. And these would be the columns that can be used as ID. So the combination of these columns identify one sole observation or value. So I have the municipality and no modalidad, and these other columns for identification. Then I want to know where should I get the names from for each one of the new variables. So in this case, the names come from this column called variable or variable. And where I've got to get the values from. The values are from this column called value. And when I run this, it's going to transform it into the white format. And you can see that I only have half of the rows that I had before because I had two separate columns with the area and the yield. So with this format, that's the organized format, I can do many other things in an easier way. For example, if I want to compute the production, the total product, that would be the result of the area times the yield. I would have to use the mutate function, and I can create a new column with the product. So it's a lot easier compared to before because I used to have everything in one column and there's no way to do this operation. This is one of the examples of why this organized format is so important. Now I'm going to show that we can use the same function to pivot into an even wider format. So I don't want to stop, and I don't want to use it to analysis, but to do a comparison instead. Or just to show how the function is being used. So right here, I'm taking the names based on the modality. So I'm using the modality, not using it as an identification, but I'm going to use columns based on the modality and the values of the yield. So I'm going to run it here. And you can see that the data is wider. So for each municipality, I have the yield and the irrigation or riego, I can use it to compare and also to see that many municipalities do not have both of them. There are values that are not available that are implicit in a format, but when they're changing to this wider format, they change into numbers that are missing observations. But the main objective to do this is just to give you an example of how we can use the other function. It's just to show you how the functions have the opposed effect. So now I'm going to use the data wide function, and I'm going to use the pivot longer function in order to have a long pivot. So the columns are this one, the riego or irrigation, and temporal, temporary, and the names. This is the name that I'm going to give to each column. In this case, I'm going to put normal modalidad, and the values are going to call rendimiento or yield in English. So when I use the function here, I have the modality and the yield. And this will be in the long format that can be useful to generate a graphic or to carry out other types of analysis. So these are the two main functions of this package that in many cases are necessary. And I just wanted to give you a warning. The name of the functions have changed in the more recent packages. So in the links, you'll probably see that they appear as gather and spread, which were the names that were used before. But in the newer versions of the package, they have these names, pivot longer and pivot wider, that make more sense. It's more clear how to use and what's the objective of each one of the functions.